subject, and we are excited to have the three of you up here to share with us your experiences. Later this afternoon, we're going to talk about nearshoring with a panel that's going to be terrific, and you could have been on that panel too, by the way, Gina. You've got a great story to tell. And as we talk about moving operations closer to home, and we gave you this preview when I introduced Gina earlier, there probably isn't a better example nationally to your example. And clearly during COVID, the nearshoring impact, despite COVID, had to be an incredible experience. But even today, if you could just talk a little bit about and tell the folks here, some of whom probably know the story, many who probably don't, of what BBW does.
Yeah. Well, first of all, it completely predates me, of course.
Right.
I was just blessed to sort of inherit all of the advantages that onshoring and nearshoring meant. And boy, am I glad that my predecessor was prescient enough to think ahead, and it came in very, very handy, as you can imagine, during COVID. So what it essentially is just about 10 miles from here, there is something called Beauty Park. It's actually called the Personal Care and Beauty Campus, but we call it Beauty Park for short. And there are about 10 manufacturers there in something like 450 plus acres that more than a decade ago, as I said, there was just that forethought that said, what if we assembled a network of suppliers that would confer the advantages of having almost just-in-time type supply chain, visibility, collaboration, you name it. And so we told the story only last July from a, sort of, as you mentioned earlier, front page of the Wall Street Journal, and we were quite proud to do that. And as I said, there are many, many team members that were here when all of that happened, and it was just incredible. And if you think about the categories that we have, hand sanitizer, candles, lotions, soaps. Think about what was almost the biggest silver lining, if you will, that came out of the pandemic, was just the categories that this company had. But when you coupled it with Beauty Park being in proximity, it was just an incredibly responsive supply chain. At a time, and of course this is just me reading about it because I've only been here a year and a half, but at a time when I know, having been in the industry, that people were flipping their supply chain as quickly as possible. They were going from whatever they were making to vats of sanitizers as quickly as they could, but no one could match the responsiveness of what Beauty Park provided the company. So it was just an incredible, as I said, an incredible insight to be able to do that. Now, it wasn't, by the way, the name of the article is The Soap Company That Cracked the Code, or something about manufacturing in America. It was a front page Wall Street Journal. It was 3 or 4 pages, and it went into great detail around all the other advantages. For example, the transportation alone. So what used to take hundreds of miles, because you had so let's take the foaming hand soap, which hopefully many of you have in your bathrooms or your sinks. If you just take that and say, okay, there was a pump, there was a bottle, there was a lid, and a filler, all of that within, right there in Beauty Park. All that manufactured right there in New Albany. Having that access, and then you're not really traveling, you're not taking all these componentry. And so even from an ESG perspective, just the carbon footprint reduction alone of transporting all of those individual components, and then when you combine that with the speed that we could get to the stores, that was something that I had not really seen that. So what's the quick result of all of this? We have a agile and very responsive supply chain, end-to-end visibility, and then we also we only have to buy 2/3 of inventory that we think we need. And if anything is running complete, let's say there's a gingham gorgeous variant that is one of the products that we have. Let's say that's running ahead of demand forecast. If we're only buying 2/3, we can actually chase, and we call that instant. We can chase it into the stores in weeks, which is very, very fast. And so what happens is, as a retailer, you may know that inventory can really clog up. You may have to clear a lot of inventory if you guess wrong. But having that ability to only buy that much and then chase the rest really provides a great deal of responsiveness. And then the final benefit that I think our team has is that you end up collaborating right there. So in my old world, where everything was being transported all over the overseas, et cetera, there was not only a lot of transportation, but you didn't have the different suppliers and the different teams looking at a line trial. And if you're familiar with product development, you really get a benefit from having people on site, the packaging people looking at, because they can troubleshoot what's happening right there on the line. And so you can actually have problems solved quicker as well.
Terrific story, and for those of you who are interested in learning more, the article is terrific, and we'll have it on our website. Before I ask an additional question, Chris mentioned Stop the Spread. It's just one of the things that we did during COVID as a business roundtable, a statewide association. I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the video that most of you didn't see or watch that talks about building a better Ohio, trying to inform legislators and community leaders about why it's important to have businesses located in your state, including big businesses. During COVID, Bath & Body donated hand sanitizer. We had so many companies that donated things for the good of the state at the time, and your company certainly stepped up, and we thank Bath & Body Works for that. So Bobby, before I ask you to tell us a little bit about MI Homes, where you're located, where you build homes, a home builder, right? Home builder supply chain. Interesting, right? So
That's what I said.
yeah, right. So as a public company, as a home builder, you experience sometimes conflicting expectations. People want more homes, but then they make it difficult for you to build more homes, as an example. So talk a little bit about the states that you're in, you're headquartered in Ohio, and as you navigate the pressures or those conflicting pressures, particularly in an era where we see, not just in Ohio, but across probably most of the markets that you're in, increased demands for a variety of reasons, for home ownership, for homes to live in. And how do you deal with the pressures and the inconsistencies of that disruption to what you do every day?
Well,
and what are they?
That's a great question. First of all, thank you for having me, and it's great to be back here. If I could just take 1 minute, maybe less because I'm looking at the clock, I want to just build on something Gina said, having previously served for many years on the Bath & Body Works board. First of all, it's always great coming back here because it's the best smelling corporate office in America, thanks to you all over there. And the other thing is the beauty park. Most of the central Ohio, and certainly the statewide corporate and business community, probably is unaware of that. And prescient, I think was the word you used, it's amazing. And it's not even nearshoring, it's almost like on site. And during the peaks of COVID, I think that if I recall, Bath & Body Works was producing 10 million of those little hand sanitizers a month.
Pocket bags.
Yes, the pocket backs, all over there. Anyway, it's a remarkable story, and thank God for that, and that it's here in Ohio, and it's great for Central Ohio, great for the company. Anyway, to answer your question, we do business in 17 cities, across 5 or 6 in the Midwest, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Minnesota, Michigan, Tennessee, we're in Nashville, Charlotte and Raleigh in North Carolina, 4 Florida markets, Tampa, Orlando, Fort Myers, Naples, and Sarasota, as well as 4 markets in Texas, San Antonio, Austin, Houston, and the largest market in the country by a considerable margin, Dallas, Texas. Dallas has been the largest housing market in the United States for about 5 years now. Prior to that, it was Houston. Dallas produces more homes in a year than Columbus, Cincinnati, Indianapolis, Chicago, and Minneapolis combined. Every year. Not just, they got lucky last year. Every year. And at least for the last decade, that's been the case. And if I could just, there's a lot to your question. You can't build a house without a lot, obviously. But in order to build a house on a lot, the lot has to have zoning. And in order to get zoning, you have to go through a legislative process. And that process is very local and differs. Of the 17 cities we're in, there's probably 500 unique zoning jurisdictions. Columbus might lead the league, if I can just say that. Cincinnati's a close second in the number of unique zoning jurisdictions. If you drive from Jake's plant, American Nitral's plant, all the way up to the great Smucker facility, you'll probably pass through 200 unique zoning jurisdictions. And they all have a different view of the world. And it's interesting because Columbus, and I'm a Buckeye, but I'm also an Ohio Buckeye, Ohio State Buckeye too. But I love Columbus. This is the city I love most. I was born here, and our business wouldn't be around if it weren't for Columbus. But we're the largest builder in Ohio, and that's through our operations in Columbus and Cincinnati all the way up to Dayton. And between the two markets right now, we do about 1,500 homes a year, which, to be the largest home builder in Dallas today, you got to do 9,000 homes a year in one city. So, yeah, it's great that we're the largest builder in Ohio. We're quite profitable here, and I think we build a great product. But 15 homes a year, that shouldn't really cut it for a state like Ohio. Back in the 90s, we were building 2,000 homes a year in Columbus alone. Today, we're building about 900. It's not because we shrunk. It's because what got us here is not going to get us there. And you always have to ask yourself that question in all kinds of things, business life. Will what got us here got us there? Columbus, Greater Central Ohio, used to have a very favorable pro-growth, if you will, attitude towards residential zoning. And it's gone completely from here almost to here. And I've told this story, and it sounds it sounds unbelievable. If you take a high-density community like Bexley, where the average density is about 5.5 per acre, and you tried to develop Bexley today pursuant to the zoning standards that exist in Greater Central Ohio, Bexley would almost have to encompass enough land to go all the way to 270. And that's the difference between 5 units per acre and 1 unit per acre. And imagine at 1 unit per acre, which is what most of the zoning around here is allowing, if anything. There are zoning jurisdictions out near the ground where the new Intel plant is going to be built that wants 0 housing because of the impact on schools and just all kinds of reasons. And, some of them, require better debate. We probably have done a poor job making our case. But there's a lot of challenges here. And in Greater Central Ohio today, there's around 3,000 to 4,000 new homes being built every year. In Greater Raleigh, North Carolina, there's about 13,000. In Greater Charlotte, there's about 14,000. In Nashville, there's about 12,000. Indianapolis, about 8,000. So you've got 2, 3, 4x. Dallas is 55,000. Now, Dallas isn't a city with 2.5 million, but Raleigh and Charlotte and Tampa, there's 14,000, 15,000 new homes being built every year. Again, here 3 to 4. So everyone in this room that wants to grow their business and their workforce here, at some point they got to go home at night. And not all, but many want to live in a home. And there's a tremendous, very acute housing shortage in Greater Central Ohio, and to a lesser extent, Cincinnati. Last point, and then I'll yield. Zonda has ranked Columbus, Ohio, the number 1 underperforming housing market in the United States. That's not a list you want to be on. And that's got to change. Something's got to give. By the way, throughout the decade of the 90s, there were 10,000 to 12,000 new homes built in Columbus every year. Every year. Now it's 3 to 4, and the city's 2.5 times the size. So something, you don't have to study the data very hard. You don't have to double click on anything to see that there's a problem.
Thanks, Bobby. Well said.
I'm sorry to be so sobering, but
No,
it'll get unhooked one way or the other.
right. Tim, I'm going to ask you to tell us a little bit about Fifth Third and then answer this question. Sometimes we discuss the serious risks stemming from third and fourth tier of the supply chain and think, well, it's really far from us and it's not really impactful. You can speak to that impact that you saw firsthand during COVID. But tell us first about Fifth Third and then tell us about that example.
Yeah, mostly at the moment, I'm just glad I don't have to deal directly with local zoning jurisdictions. Fifth Third's well known for what we do in the communities where we serve. I think that about $215 billion in assets, but as it relates to supply chains, the role that we play in helping people manage liquidity and processing payments is probably more relevant. Owing to some investments the bank made back in the 50s, we process over $16 trillion a year in payments, which is an order of magnitude larger than what we do on the lending side of the business. And it gives us a pretty unique view into the way that orders turn into cash and procurement request turns into payments. And I think one of the things that may be underappreciated as we think about supply chains and resiliency was the lack of liquidity that was in the system that was exposed when we went into the lockdown in March of 2020. The average small business in the U.S. didn't have even 2 weeks worth of expenses on hand. And it's the reason why it was so important that we got the PPP program out quickly. That taxed our supply chain. We did 50 times more small business administration loan volume in a period of a couple of months than we would do in a normal year. I'm sure that's true at Key and at Huntington and at the other great financial institutions that we have inside the state. But it was important because liquidity is a little bit like oxygen. It's not enough to have it most of the time, right? You actually have to have it all the time in order to be able to operate. On our side, the processing $16 trillion in payments a year is still pretty labor intensive, not as much as it was when the majority of that was checks, but there's a lot of currency, there's a lot of paper that still moves through the systems. And in addition to the 6,000 people we have who work in central operations here in Ohio, and in Western Michigan, we have about another 3,000 positions that are offshore that allow us to run 24/7 in terms of getting payments processed. And we had strict lockdown rules here in the U.S., but nothing like what we saw in India, where our offshore operations were. And overnight, we literally lost 3,000 jobs. So 15 to 20 years worth of componentizing processes and moving them offshore had to get run in reverse in 48 hours over a weekend. And it taught us a lot about the importance of redundancy, yes, but in particular cross-training, cross-development. We had to think differently about privacy and security because we were using facilities to guarantee privacy versus the sorts of surveillance tools that are available on an individual PC. And then we had to work very hard, essentially raise a volunteer army and get people from the branches and our corporate offices to take on work that they hadn't been asked to do previously. Set a good example, I even keyed in a few exception payments that got kicked out through our lockbox processing. But banks play a role in the movement of money that could have ground to a halt if you hadn't had the energy that I think the industry in general put into making sure that the wheels of commerce could continue to grind forward. What we see now, which I think is encouraging, is in general, businesses are operating with more liquidity, like line utilization's a little bit lower. The amount of cash that businesses keep on hand just in case has gone up. Clearly, there's a lot of movement in inventories and inventory levels coming up. But maybe more importantly, we spent like 35, 40 years as a country moving toward these componentized, asset-light, more highly leveraged business models, which were really a response to the rise of private equity in the U.S. and the focus on debt as a mechanism to address the capital structure versus debt for investment in expansion or working capital. And that, I think, is healthy for the system because asset-light models work great until they don't, and then they can be pretty catastrophic. So it's neat to see what you're doing here, a great example for other people to follow.
So one of the most significant barriers to ensure a reliable network of supply chain is workforce. We talked about workforce at lunch. And so for you, Gina, it's workforce in this building and other buildings. It's 10 miles from here. It all has to work together. And there's been a lot of debate about the workforce and expectations from employees, and how do you deal with that as the leader, whether it is dealing with minimum wage, dealing with remote work, at least for your white-collar employees, basic educational competencies. What are your thoughts today on how to deal with, to what Mark said earlier, workers' expectations in today's environment and the changing of the workforce expectations?
Yeah. No, it's a great question, and one that we spend a lot of time on, given the, the various populations, not just store associates, but our DCs that are right here as well. And hopefully when you came today, you maybe went by a sign that talks about our latest pride point, whether it's, pay equity, at all levels for race and gender, or whether it's inclusion, awards that we often receive. So some of that is real, like it's not sort of pay-to-play type awards, but things that we think are very important in terms of the employee value proposition, what it means to be an associate at Bath & Body Works. I would say three things. One is the remote, which we can speak to. Second is education, which you raised. And then I would put other benefits in there. And I think Mark and the panel before touched on the same sorts of things. So from a remote perspective, ever since the pandemic, obviously, there's a whole different set of expectations with respect to hybrid and what that means. And here in the home office, we typically operate at a hybrid level. So not everybody, some people can be fully remote, but a lot of people maybe can't be at all. But generally speaking, 3 days in the office and 2 days either at your home or another. That's just home office. Obviously, from the DC perspective, they also, expectations, we do everything we can to make sure that we are flexible with respect to shifts and things like that. But based on volume, they're here pretty much, the full time. And we have multiple buildings, so even when we're physically here, we can virtually be on a screen and literally be at DC7 and DC3. So we have come, I believe, and I've only, as I said, been here a year and a half, but we've, I think, hit a good sweet spot with respect to what hybrid can deliver. Now, the other thing, though, is in our industry, innovation is the lifeblood of our industry and our company. And so nothing is going to beat the in-person sort of collaboration, the culture boosters. I sort of say, if you have a meeting culture, you can do that virtually, but if you have a conversation culture, you need to do that in person. So we're always trying to find sort of the right balance from the remote perspective. But you're right, and my adult children would agree, the expectations are fundamentally different these days. Let me go to education, which is another part. Here, one of the beautiful things about retail is that you literally can start at entry level. And when I go into the stores, I always hear these heartwarming stories of someone who was a seasonal employee. So they might have only been there in, November, December, Black Friday through the end of the holiday. But then they become a key holder, which is a role inside of our stores, or then they'll become a store manager, and they'll work their way up to almost, quite senior level, in the field. Similarly, that can happen in DCs as well. You don't necessarily need a 4-year degree. There's vocational training that we, also support. I think we have a great maintenance technician sort of partnership with Columbus State. So we're doing everything we can with respect to education to, upskill, reskill as necessary. So that's the education part. And the last thing I'll say is other benefits. And this was talked about earlier. Well-being is absolutely crucial. And we happen to be in DC3, which is last year we opened up our wellness center. So similar to the comment earlier in the panel, to have an on-site center that we operate through a partnership with Walgreens, we actually offer very affordable physical therapy if necessary, any other, so we have a nurse practitioner there as well, so if you got anything from a cold to, something that maybe you hurt, you can go in there and you can also get very, very affordable prescriptions. So when I first came in, I had to sort of I remember signing the PAR for this, which is the request for capital here. And I thought, oh my goodness, what is this? And let me tell you, this is a huge benefit. I think that really does build, our employer brand. So I'm excited for what we've been able to do for all of the Columbus-based store associates as well as the DC and home office associates. So we're getting lots of good feedback on what that brings.
That's great. Tim, the Fifth Third story.
Yeah. We are not a hybrid company. So we have folks that fall into one of three categories. Either you're, and I think frankly part of the issue that we face as a country is the debate got shifted here on in person or at the office or at home. And I think, like you said, it has much more to do with, are we working together or are we working in an atomized way? So about half our workforce sits in a retail branch or in an operations center. They're there all the time. Their first day back in the office was the day after the lockdown. I think in a very positive way, one of the rallying cries inside our company was that we were all in it together during the pandemic. And it didn't feel right once vaccines were broadly available and we were confident in our ability to manage the corporate offices in a way that would keep people healthy, not to have the same expectations in both places. Now, we employ folks ideally from the time they graduate college through to the time that they elect to retire. And if you're going to employ people, you're going to be an employer who works with somebody over the course of their entire career, you have to recognize you got to meet them where they are in different life stages. So there are about 10% of the roles in the company that are designated remote. That's one category. The remainder are in person, but if you are an employee in good standing, the default expectation is that we will work with you to tailor a schedule that fits your specific life needs. So if you have young children and you're trading off pickup and drop off with a spouse, if you have a ailing parent and you're taking turns watching them and you need to work remotely an entire week every month or otherwise, we work with you in terms of flexibility. But what makes that work is the fact that everybody is still then in the office. Anybody who doesn't need flexibility is there. And that has been important for us. We did, though, have to fight a lot initially to get over the idea that this was an issue of trust, because that wasn't the motivating factor. It's just I would do town halls and say, who here joined a virtual happy hour at the beginning of the pandemic? Every hand would go up. Say, okay, who's done one in the last 60 days? There'd be no hands up. Why not? It doesn't feel the same. It's like, okay, I think we're done here. I think we made our point.
Bobby, hard to build a house remotely.
Yeah, work from home, aside from, everyone in this room has an opinion about it, I'm sure. I'm not a fan, never have been, because I just don't think that, for the reasons that you particularly touched on, Gina, with the opportunity to imbue culture and idea sharing, I think there's a big disconnect. Having said that, in our business, it's impossible. This seems like an old-style term, we were declared an essential business in the weeks following March 15th when COVID first came on. So we were allowed as a home building company to go back to be in the office. And there was a period of about 3 or 4 months. I stayed home for maybe a week or two, but there was a period for about 3 or 4 months where a lot of our folks were trying to work from home, and it was a bit of a disaster. But we employ around 1,800 people company-wide, directly, across our 17 cities and here our corporate office in Columbus. Indirectly, because all of the subcontractors, the framers, the block layers, the electricians, the plumbers, the road contractors, all of the folks without whom we could not do what we do, that's another about 30,000 indirect employees. They're all independent subcontractors. And that work from home doesn't work for them either, because you got to be there. The biggest issue, we don't have a problem with finding people, to work within our operation directly. The indirect support, the subcontractor trade, there's a tremendous shortage. And our industry, particularly the large builder group, and we're one of the largest builders in the country, we've really leaned into it in a big way. We're pouring a lot of money into it. We're trying to do things Look, there's an immigration piece to this that's almost impossible to solve, but that would help a great deal if that were relaxed somewhat. But the other thing is, not a lot of people want to go to school to learn to frame a house for whatever reason. And yet so many, you look at the 10 largest home builders in the country, and almost every one of them was founded by someone that knew how to do that, including ours. I don't. But so what used to be, hey, that's the way it is.
Yeah.
Now it's viewed as that's not for me. That's beneath me. And even though you can make a lot of money doing that, we're trying to do things to really pour into the half a dozen or so universities that have really good programs in construction management, mostly focused on commercial. We're trying to do things to get that focus to move towards residential. And that's really to benefit our subcontractors, not directly us. But if our subcontractors can't be successful, we can't either. So it's another way of looking at nearshoring.
Yeah. Final question. This has been terrific. Looking forward and thinking about your supply chain, what poses the most pressing risks to your supply chain or other challenges? What keeps you up at night thinking, boy, this is a challenge that we have to figure out as it relates to the supply chain, or it could be something unrelated to the supply chain as someone in industry-wise, in your particular industry?
Yeah, not so much keeping me up at night, but sort of this continuous quest for the flexibility, the responsiveness, the visibility. Notwithstanding my comment about 85% here in the U.S., we still have some, glass, outside, other things that we constantly look at different ways that we can onshore. But I would also say that last year was our inaugural report on ESG. And so we're always looking at ways to build in sustainability, into our supply chain as well. We made some fairly ambitious goals there where we talked about by 2025, we were going to have, a third of our products were going to have recyclable or compostable or reusable. And then in 2030, it was going to be 100%. And similarly, we were going to use a third of post-consumer recycle. So I would say the area of sustainability, which is important, not just because we want to, be the good citizen, but actually our customers also want that as well. So it's good for business, it's good for the planet. And so I would say it's not so much a risk, it's an opportunity, and I think we have to continue, to push on that area. And then another, but I know you have a panel coming up later, so in the minute that remains, I won't comment on it, but AI is early days for,
Yes.
What are the opportunities with machine learning, capacity planning, all of these supply chain use cases that I think are very exciting.
Well said.
Yeah.
Tim.
It's people in our business. I think as tight as the labor markets have felt, there are going to be more people retiring every year for the next 20 years than graduate from high school or college in a given year. And the byproduct of that is we all have to be focused either on using technology, as you say, to boost productivity so that we can do the same or more work with fewer folks, or we got to make sure that, in the phrase that I think the governor used the last time he was here, we don't waste a life where we work, and that we're doing what we need to do as a business community to ensure that everybody who's born in our footprint has an opportunity to be successful.
Other than regulation, Bobby?
Well, I don't think there is anything other than regulation. I wish there were, and I probably sound like I'm just trying to create an atmosphere out there where it would be great for our business. The fact is, workforce housing is urgently needed in this country, whether we're in that business or not. I think most people agree with that. And we have somewhere between 1 and 6 million, a housing shortage of somewhere between 1 and 6 million units nationwide. There's a pretty significant housing shortage in Columbus. And everybody talks about affordable housing, and they should. And people will say, why don't you build more affordable homes? And you go, God, I wish we thought of that. We would if we could. If regulation were relaxed, a significant amount of high-quality workforce housing, the kind that many of us grew up in, frankly, could be built in this country. Some cities are way ahead of the curve on this, and I mentioned them. Some aren't, and they're near and close to home. And we can't have that. Again, what got us here won't get us there if it stays the way it is. So that's what worries me.
Give these three a round of applause. Thank you so much.